Welcome to a special episode, I guess, of True Crime News Weekly. We're here and we're very humbled to be joined by Kate McClymont today, who will be talking about her book about the murder of Michael McGurk, Dead Man Walking. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, this murder and the incidents surrounding it took place about 10 years ago, almost to the day now. What can such an incident, which has already been poured over by newspaper inches, many of it written by yourself and your colleague Van der Carson, and at least one book already about Michael McGurk, his life and the murder that took place. What can we learn today about Sydney in this episode of Dark Criminal History in light of all that?
Look, when you write things for the newspapers, you only have 500 words to tell a tale, so you only concentrate on one or two key things. When you have a book, you have the opportunity to explore the greater detail of events and happenings and connections. And the thing that always strikes me about Sydney is that we live in this veneer of polite society, but underneath there's this undercurrent of corruption and spivs and dodgy deals, often facilitated by the same lawyers, the same accountants, the same property developers. And I think that the book explores a lot of those connections.
And you say this, allude to it in the book, it even says on the back cover, it is a very Sydney story, but now in the globalised world we have much deeper connections around the world to, I guess, some equally ignominious places, both urban and more regional. Can you tell us a bit about how this story relates to other parts of the world as well?
Well, the funny thing about this story is that the story itself has many overseas elements. For instance, at the time of Michael McGurk's murder, he was actually involved in a lawsuit against one of the world's richest men, the Sultan of Brunei, because McGurk had bought a miniature Quran and he'd brought it from an ex-KGB officer in Moscow, and he was trying to resell it to the Sultan of Brunei for $8 million. And this was a 400-year-old relic. In fact, it was made at the time Queen Elizabeth I was on the throne. So it's funny how the ties, extend globally now. And, crimes are local, but so many of the elements of them, have overseas connections, have people involved. And a murder is a murder. It's interesting how, the modus operandi can play out, anywhere really.
That brings me back to the actual murder itself, and the murderer is proven to be that in court. He's serving 39 years in jail. Ron Medic, the property developer. I guess the book explores this in greater detail, but in your belief, why do you believe Ron ordered this killing of Michael McGurk?
I think this is one of the most fascinating things. Why does a man who is wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams, why would you need to murder a two-bit business rival? And I sometimes think that when you do have money, and money buys you so much, to you think, well, I will just pay money and the problem will go away. So at one stage, the two hitmen said that it would cost $300,000 to do it. And Medic said, that's so much money. And his right-hand man who organised the murder for him, Lucky Gattalari. Yes. He said, well, Ron, if it's too much money, don't do it. And Ron said, no, I want him gone. He's embarrassing me. He's making me the laughing stock of the eastern suburbs. So it was more that Michael McGurk was getting the better of Ron in a whole lot of lawsuits that were playing out. You just think why he wouldn't just either settle the lawsuit, give the man the money, get him out of your life legitimately. It's a mystery to me, really.
Do you think that leads me on to the next question, why Michael McGurk contacted you at the time he did, just prior to his murder, and let you on a bit of information, including the fact he was going to be murdered by Ron Medic. Was that out of pure desperation on his behalf? Have you thought about that instance, why he was so motivated to contact a journalist, but that journalist to also be you?
No, look, it was more that he planned to use me. And so why he contacted me was that my colleague Vander Carson and I had stumbled across this intriguing story where Michael McGurk had been charged with firebombing a house that Ron Medic had owned and was suing the owner of the house. And it was a complicated case where Medic had sold his house, but he'd lent the sale price to the purchaser, and when the purchaser couldn't pay, he hired McGurk to try to get the money out of him. So we'd written this story, and McGurk no doubt was angry about being featured on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald as a firebomber. So in talking to me, he was trying to use me to advantage to say, look, you're looking at the wrong person, forget about me. The person you should be looking at is Ron Medic. And when we didn't write stories about Ron Medic, he got increasingly frustrated, and he rang me up and said, you don't understand. Ron Medic is going to have me murdered. Ron Medic has got a hit out on me. And at the time I thought, oh, how ridiculous. You know, people will say anything to get you to do a story. So you can imagine 10 days later, when Michael McGurk was in fact shot dead outside his home in front of his 9-year-old son, I just felt like vomiting. I just felt sick.
What will it take to clean up politics in Sydney?
It will never be cleaned up.
Is that a pessimistic view, or is that just a realistic?
No, look, from a journalist, it's an optimistic view. Otherwise, what would we have to write about? But I think realistically, human nature will always throw up those trying to gain an advantage and those who are happy to profit by facilitating that advantage for them. And I think in the case of political parties, you know, trying to get, their coffers filled to fund campaigns, to, fund, various political, things that they need to do. It's donations is just an area fraught with potential corruption. And because of what happened in this book, because of the murder of Michael McGurk, that was the catalyst for introducing the ban. Property developers in New South Wales cannot donate money to political parties. And the current corruption inquiry is looking at exactly how one Chinese property developer, a billionaire called Huang Zhangmo, managed to trot into Labor Party headquarters with $100,000 in an Aldi shopping bag to circumvent the donation laws.
And so do you think a whole other industry is now propped up to just simply go against those laws, and we see third-party fronts, and
yes,
we see dodgy activities with actual criminals to actually circumvent these laws? So have these laws, in a way, had a worse effect? Like, what really? That's why you think things will never change, because even the laws themselves are being misused in all kinds of...
I know, but I think at least even if you stop some people doing it, or most people, it's worthwhile. Yeah. And I think with regard to developers, most developers don't care about our democratic process. They care about who is in power and whether they can get access to those in power, because that might influence, the local Labor or Liberal Party. So I just think if any of those are stopped, but there will always be people circumventing the laws. For instance, the fact that individuals aren't allowed to donate more than $5,000 each.
Are you still sometimes surprised yourself about the networks that investigative journalism can help bring out?
Look, so surprised. And in that case, I had sent Charlie Teo some questions. So I was shocked. Within 24 hours, I had associates of Mick Gatto ringing up asking me about the questions. And I just couldn't quite work out how Charlie Teo and Mick Gatto were linked, but of course Mick Gatto had been a big supporter of the Charlie Teo Foundation. But it never ceases to amaze you who knows who. Australia is a very small place.
That's right, it sure is. As a journalist, what's becoming better for journalists here in Australia, and maybe what's becoming worse or not so good as well?
Look, I think what's becoming better for journalists is, as you say, is access to information. Like things that years ago you would have to go to another state, go into their holdings and look up their court files or something. Yes, so now a lot of those are online. But I think, you know, one of the problems with journalism is that because of the fragmenting of journalism and the downsizing in newsrooms, you know, people like me have the luxury of having, you know, weeks or months to look at something. But in the past, where there might have been 10 of me doing that job, now there's not so many. And, you know, in previous years, for instance, the Sydney Morning Herald, we had a reporter just covering the High Court. We had specific reporters doing religion, doing health, doing medicine. Now, a lot of, you know, general reporters are having to do those rounds, which means they can't possibly do lengthy investigations into their field of expertise because they've got to stay on top of what's happening in their own area. So, you know, I think that that's a bad thing. But one of the most upsetting things is the contraction of local journalism, like the shrinking of the local newspapers, because
we're talking about places that aren't small areas. We're talking about places like, you know, Ballarat, Bendigo,
yes,
big regional towns that used to have a big tradition of local journalism, and that would get picked up. Those journalists would then
exactly, and those journalists would hold to account their local property developers or their local council. And when you've got, you know, like one or two journalists at a paper having to cover anything, again, I just think, you know, corruption flourishes when there aren't enough journalists to shine a spotlight on their activities.
This brings me to my final question. On the front of the cover, rightly so, Kate's described as the Queen of Australian journalism. That's a quote by the Saturday paper. That's a more respected publication, even more respected than True Crime News Weekly, I believe. But you are rightly so, you are regarded as one of the queens of Australian investigative journalism, pure royalty. You've won 7 Walkley Awards. As a journalist, what would you like to be remembered for, and what tip could you give a budding investigative journalist person?
Look, I would like to be remembered for a person who doesn't look away, because, you know, one saying that I always stick by is that, you know, corruption flourishes when good men and women look the other way. And I think our role as a journalist is to be the eyes and ears of our readers or viewers. And, you know, we have to be brave, we have to be courageous, because people depend on us to shine a spotlight into those that hold power, and we need to hold those people to account.